the same room before, but we've talked on the phone and shared a lot of emails. And Linda, I don't want to get your last name wrong. Is it Muth?
Yep.
Muth. Okay, I just want to make sure. So this is Linda Muth, and she's going to be talking to us about her work in El Salvador and how our Day of Giving that's coming up this next Monday, March 30th, is going to support the work that she is doing there in El Salvador. So I'm delighted to have Linda. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Yeah. And before I turn things over to her, because I'm going to let her do most of the talking, but in case anybody's watching and they're like, I don't know what No More Shame is, or I don't know what you're doing, Angie, I just want to talk just for a second about how the outreach project that I call No More Shame got born, I guess I would say, and the work that we're doing. And I will share, I think I've told most of this to Linda, but it's probably been close to maybe 3 or even 4 years ago. And I was standing in my kitchen scrolling through my Facebook feed. Everybody does that, right? And I clicked on an article that I was reading about girls in Africa. I believe it was in Africa, actually, that had to drop out of school completely because they did not have products to keep the blood off their clothes, basically, or off themselves when they were having their period. And so they couldn't go to school. And it had these statistics about how over time, if you miss so many days and then you get far enough behind, and just like the percentages of girls actually have to completely drop out of school simply because they don't have feminine hygiene products. And I just confessed that, like, I was crying. I had no idea that this happened in our world. I have always lived a pretty comfortable life. And we didn't talk about things like periods in my house when we were growing up very much, but when I needed something, I had them, right? And so I had no idea that girls were dropping out of school. And I realized what it means to drop out of school, for a girl, and how that affects the rest of their life. And God just kind of stirred something in me, and I didn't know how, but I knew that at some point I would somehow put my hands and feet and voice to work in this issue. And it was probably maybe even close to 2 years later that I actually connected with a high school acquaintance of mine that is a mutual friend of Linda and mine, who connected me with Linda, talked to me about the work that she's going to share with you a little bit that she does in El Salvador. And Linda actually taught me the concept of Glocal. I use that word all the time. I'd never heard that word before. Yes. And she shared with me, I'll let you tell me what Glocal is, and then I'll share with you how No More Shame is Glocal. Go ahead, Linda. Tell me how teach everybody what Glocal is if they don't know.
Absolutely. So Glocal is, it's obviously a combination, maybe,
yes,
of global and local. And it was born really out of, in two ways. First, an observation that a lot of the people who are doing global work, good things in the world, are the same people who are doing good things in their communities locally. And so that cross-pollination of people who are just called and wired to do good things, we noticed that they were doing that in both places. So that was one thing. And then the Lutheran Church, of which I'm a part, coined that phrase then, Glocal, in a training event in order to kind of capture that spirit within us of building strong community, whether that's across long distances or in our own neighborhoods. And so it's a word that's used kind of formally within the Lutheran Church network, but also in places like this where we are grabbing onto that word and kind of grabbing onto the work that it resembles.
Yes. And I remember you teaching me that actually you'll have more success globally or internationally if you also focus locally, and you'll have more success locally if you also focus internationally. And at the time, I'll just be real honest, I thought, I don't even know what that looks like, but I began to just put out some feelers. And I began to learn that in our local community, and I reached out to, at one point, the social worker at the high school just right here in my backyard, and just said, is this even a problem? And my heart was just wrecked over the fact, she's like, oh, I have girls every month that are every day, maybe not every day, but every week that are down here asking for products, and also girls every day that miss school because they don't have what they need. I'm like, right in my backyard, and I didn't know. And so the project began to kind of take on a dual role. And I have what I call ladies drives, which I think also was your word. And we collect anytime I do like an event or host a retreat or start a new Bible study class. I always say something like, my teaching is free, but you pay me in boxes of pads and tampons, kind of thing. And we do ladies drives, and people sometimes just give me money, and I go into CVS all the time because that's where I have like a little card, and I'm always getting coupons, and they're helping me buy the best deal. And I take these pads and tampons locally to pantries and organizations that work with women and girls. And to date, we've taken over 8,700 feminine hygiene products to local agencies, yes, and we have sent over $3,500 to Linda, whose work we're going to talk about here in just a second. And so the No More Shame Project is Glocal. It is active. It is at work. And I believe from the feedback that I get from people who are on the front lines that it is making a difference. And so I wholeheartedly just ask all of those who are watching this now or watching it later to consider what your part might be in terms of furthering this work. And kind of with that, I'm going to stop talking a little bit and ask Linda some questions. First of all, just tell us a little bit about you and your family, and just kind of how you split your time and all that kind of stuff before we get into the nuts and bolts of your work.
Sure. So again, hi, nice to meet everybody. So I'm a Milwaukee girl, born and raised. I'm married, and my husband and I have 3 adult children. We have 4 grandchildren, and they live a couple of them close by and a couple of them a little bit far away in New Jersey.
Wow.
My background is actually in math and physics, which I don't use that very much. But
I know nothing about that, except for now that we're under this like quarantine or lockdown, whatever. My younger son or his school, he goes to a private Christian school, and so we're trying to homeschool. So I'm like doing math, and I'm like, he was doing like, he's 10, so he's doing 2 multiplication by like 2 numbers by 2 numbers, and I was like, well, this is how you do it. He's like, that's not how you do it at all. I'm like, well, is the answer right? So there you go. I'm sorry, but that's my math and physics, but but go ahead. Yeah.
It's a great example, right, of how over the course of life, we have these experiences and these education pieces that fall into place, and sometimes we just don't know where we will be called. And so that background as a teacher, I was actually a high school math teacher for a little while. And then after the kids came along, I took a job as the education ministries coordinator in my local congregation outside of Milwaukee. Which is actually how the connection happened with El Salvador as well. And I can talk a little bit more about that if you're interested. But through that experience of coordinating education ministries in the church, first in a paid capacity for a suburban congregation, and then later through a call from God to do that same work as a volunteer in an urban congregation in Milwaukee, which is where I am still serving, and where we are members now. So we have we sold our house in the suburbs and bought a condo in Milwaukee, close to the congregation where I serve, and so that's kind of where we're at now. The connection with El Salvador happened in 1995, actually, which is quite a long time ago.
Yes.
Was a complete act of the Holy Spirit. During the early months of my work at the congregation that I was at, I felt strongly that the kids needed a global ministry connection, and they didn't have one. And so I prayed about it and opened up the Global Ministry Handbook that our national church sends out every year, and just said, Lord, where should we go? And it opened to El Salvador. Of course, then being the teacher person I am, I went to the library, studied all about El Salvador. This was before computers, and learned that Milwaukee had a very strong connection with Lutherans in El Salvador, and so it was just really meant to be. We work over the next several years at a local level in El Salvador, so congregation to congregation. So that's suburban church, the urban church, and our Salvadoran local congregation are sister churches together. And that is within a larger umbrella of a synodical relationship between the group of Lutheran churches in the greater Milwaukee area with all of the Lutheran churches in El Salvador.
Okay.
So there's this very good partnering structure that is designed to build relationships globally.
Yeah.
And help us to learn more about people who are different than us
Yeah.
and another culture, and to walk together in ministry, supporting one another.
I grew up and received my pastoral training in the United Methodist Church, and one of the things that I've always appreciated about the United Methodist Church is the idea of connectionalism, right? Which is really what you're talking about. Is how because we are all under the umbrella of United Methodist, there are certain friendships that are like, it's just like the brothers and sisters, the unity that can be there, right?
Right.
Yeah, because we have some of the same values and goals and desires. Yeah. So I remember one time my car broke down. I was going from Florida to Illinois, where I live. And my father told me, he's like, if you can get to a United Methodist church, like explain who you are and they will help you find a place to, and I thought, you know what, and I'll never forget that, because I
Right.
thought that's, there's like friendship when you walk into a church and just be like, this is who I am. And this is, I'm young and I've never been in this town before, but we have some kind of connection, that a friendship. And I think that's what I think of when I hear you talking about that connection with the people. So talk to us a little bit about kind of the larger ministry that you're doing in El Salvador, because this, like what we're doing with helping girls have kits for their periods to stay in school, is just this like a tiny little part, I think, of what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about kind of the larger ministry that you have there or that you're a part of anyway in El Salvador.
Right. So my husband and I, like I mentioned, we sold our house and we bought a condo in Milwaukee, but we also bought one in San Salvador. One of
Okay.
our life goals that we set out early on was to work in the paid sector of the world until we had enough,
Mm.
and to be able to retire at an age from the paid sector in order to give back to society and our community, while we still had physical energy and capacity to do that.
Mhm.
And so we were very blessed to be able to realize that goal. And about 4 years ago, my husband joined me in the unpaid world of volunteering. So for over 20 years, I have been traveling to El Salvador through the network of the church relationship, and was actually the coordinator for the relationships in the Milwaukee area in the Lutheran Church Network for several years. And my husband also held that position for a number of years. And so we've always worked with the Salvadoran Lutheran Church in their national ministries, as well as their regional and then the local ministries. And I think that's really important when working kind of that local idea, because if we just have our eyes on the very small, sometimes we're just not aware of
Mhm.
the bigger picture of harm, in fact, that we could do by investing a whole bunch of resources in something that's very
Mhm.
focused and not having the bigger context. And
Mhm.
so now, within that work in El Salvador, what we do for the 6 months of the year that we are there, I work in the sister church office of the Salvadoran Lutheran Church, side by side with a young woman who's been there for now 2 years, um, coordinating the international relationships that the Salvadoran Lutheran Church has globally with other Lutheran church bodies in the world. And so that's churches across the United States, larger entities, non-governmental organizations through Europe and the United States. So primarily El Salvador relates with 4 different regions in the United States, in the Lutheran world, but also, as you might expect, with some regions in Germany and Scandinavia, Finland as well. And so, so that's one piece of my work. Because I've been connected with El Salvador for so long, I bring a piece of historic knowledge that the young woman who's there, who's Salvadoran, doesn't have. And so she and I
Sure.
make a pretty great team. You know, she's got so much wonderful youth and enthusiasm and knowledge. And I bring a piece of cross-cultural context to the office, as well as she's bilingual. And so the 2 of us together navigate language very well with our European and North American connections. And then aside from that, as an educator, of course, I always have my desire to be in a teaching capacity. And so, like I mentioned to you prior, is the work that my husband and I do with teaching about legal pathways for migrants who are fleeing violence or desperation in El Salvador and seeking safety in another place. And so the Salvadoran Lutheran Church has a very strong program of migrant ministries, and they care for families who need to flee within the country and seek shelter within the country of El Salvador or within another Central American country or another place in the world. And of course, because there are so many strong connections between El Salvador and the United States, which if you do a little history or do a little searching on the internet, you can learn more about that history. But almost every family in El Salvador has a family member who lives in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of
Yeah.
the in-country population in El Salvador is it's close to 7 million people. So it's a country that's the size of Massachusetts and has 7 million people. It's a very densely populated country. Much of the land isn't suitable for living on because it's volcanoes or other things
Okay.
you can't populate. So it's concentrated population centers. And then there are between 1 and 2 million Salvadorans who live in the United States. So if you think about as a percentage of the population, that comparison of 7 million in El Salvador and 1 or 2 million in the United States, and maybe even more, because how do you really count that? It's a strong connection.
Mm-hmm.
So we work to build, good knowledge and good practice. And the Salvadoran Lutheran Church definitely teaches a strong theme and has for years
Mm-hmm.
of migrating is not the solution.
Okay.
So understanding that out of desperation, a family may make a choice to flee
Mm-hmm.
and seek safety somewhere outside of El Salvador, but we look for solutions that can be made within
Okay.
the country, because no one really wants to leave home if they don't have to.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a chunk of work that we do related to that. And then I do a lot of other things with kids and teaching.
Yeah. Most of the pictures that you've sent me are like health fairs. I've
Mhm.
seen things that you teach on like breast health and menopause, and that's the kind of stuff that is connected to this, with the Days for Girls kits, the feminine hygiene kits that I know that you're making. So talk to us a little bit about how you're educating girls and women specifically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So the health fairs happen annually, and
Okay.
that's a ministry that is jointly done through the Milwaukee area Lutheran congregations and the Salvadoran National Church. It started actually just as a sister church to sister church thing that we did locally in response to a nurse practitioner who received a call from God in our congregation in suburban Milwaukee, that God was calling her to do care for people in
Mhm.
the world. She didn't know where, she didn't know what, and suddenly this El Salvador thing happened, and she was caught in that. And long story short, we had our very first mission of healing in 2000. We used the altar in our little informal building that was a church in El Salvador as the exam table. We did
Mm,
women's exams. We
interesting.
did pap smears and
Mhm.
brought the slides all back to the United States using hairspray as fixative in order to be analyzed. And at that time, we encountered 100% of the sexually active women had sexually transmitted diseases. Um,
100%?
yeah, every woman that we checked had
Oh my
something.
goodness. And
So
do you have what you need to help treat that?
we did because we anticipated that that could
Okay.
be
So that didn't
knowing,
surprise you.
knowing the culture.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we were
Oh,
surprised.
oh, okay, okay. I was like, because 'cause I'm stunned, but yeah, okay, yeah.
But knowing the culture, knowing that it's a male dominant patriarchal culture, that
Right.
men have multiple partners, we
Mhm.
anticipated that it could be something. And so over the next uh, 2 to 3 years, and from the beginning, we gave away condoms.
Mhm.
We were very straightforward with women. We gave the condoms to the women,
Mhm.
and in a 3-year period, going back to our same, this is still at the level of sister community, so just local church with local church, we saw dramatic change in the health of the women.
Wow.
And it was like night and day. And so we knew that health education, particularly for women,
Yeah,
was needed and important and could produce results.
yeah.
And so we expanded that local mission of healing into something that grew. And now, 20 years later, it's a more regional experience in El Salvador and includes not as much direct care from doctors and nurses from the US, because in El Salvador they are able to now provide that, but education. And so,
Mhm.
what it looks like, from a little thing that started with some teaching in the school and
Right.
doing women's health exams on the altar in the church,
Mhm.
um, has grown into a teaching fair that has 30 different teaching topics,
Okay.
many of them led by Salvadoran healthcare professionals. But we provide kind of the structure and the backing and some of the financial resources that are
Okay.
needed to put it in place.
And one of those teaching topics, correct me if I'm wrong, is menstruation for young
Yep,
girls, right? Which is where we kind of come in to
yep,
help provide because correct me if I'm wrong, but the girls that attend these fairs and other times during the year too, but one of the big times is the girls that attend these fairs get to go home with one of these reusable feminine hygiene kits, right? So
yeah.
how did you know that was a need or maybe you just do because you live there all the time and how are those kits helping the girls stay in school?
Yeah, and so this need became apparent during a conversation in the United States in 2016. Prior to us living there, that I was listening to a nutritionist from the US who was talking about her teaching thing that she was doing at the fair. And it was from a fair that I wasn't personally part of, but another one from Milwaukee that goes. And she had heard some wives' tales in El Salvador about what girls should eat during their menstrual cycle. And I realized that A, the nutritionist was not being respectful of the culture there, but B, that there were girls there that had all kinds of really bad information about their
Mhm.
periods and things like what they should eat during the time of
Mhm.
the cycle. And so we did a little bit of research, discovered the organization Days for Girls International, and right away, teams of women in Milwaukee started sewing the kits because we realized that this could be a tool that we could give away at a teaching
Yeah.
talk about menstruation, because really, who's going to come to a teaching talk about menstruation if you're not going to give a free gift at the
Yeah.
end? So that was
Yeah.
the plan. So
Yeah.
in 2017, we took about 250 of the washable menstruation kits, and we gave them all away during the 4 days of the fair that we ran. And there was another fair run by another group of churches in Milwaukee that gave away a similar amount of kits. And we just heard stories from the girls and their mothers and the teachers, and people started appearing. Can we have one? Can we have one? And, of course, the demand way exceeded the
Mhm.
supply. But, we realized that this really was a need. And not only the kit itself, but the education.
Education.
So
Mhm.
side by side, right?
Yeah.
The education along with the kit. And so as an outgrowth from the health fairs, the Salvadoran Lutheran Church has a team of sex education promoters, I guess is the word they use. And so when the local schools didn't have capacity to do any kind of sex education in the school, and the national government there made some more conservative choices recently and took away some of the
Mm.
opportunities that girls and boys have to learn about sex education in school. The Lutheran educators were invited in, and they are doing reproductive education. It's a 12-week unit, and they go once a week and meet with youth, boys and girls, who are mostly like middle school age.
Mhm.
Um, and when we have the capacity to give away the kits to the girls
Mhm.
at the end of this 12-week unit, that happens.
And so what we're doing then is helping you have the capacity to give away kits in the schools, right? That's, I mean, that
Absolutely.
ultimately, yeah.
Yep.
So the money that we raise does a couple of things, and Linda, elaborate and correct me. It it helps to buy supplies because the kits can be made right there in El Salvador. You have what you call the collective, right? Is
Right.
that the And
Yep.
so there's a collective there where several women are trained to make the kits, and then they make the kits so that they can be distributed in the schools when the Lutheran Church gets to do the sex education course. So the money buys supplies, and then also a local friend of mine, actually in Southern Illinois, who is a seamstress, has learned to make the bags that the kits go in. And I don't know how many she's made and sent, but I know that's in the beginning stages and it's growing. That she's learned how to make the bags, and so that's one less
Cost.
product cost. Yeah, exactly. And so the other things that can be made can go inside. So our money helps to underwrite, is that the right word, the women who are making, because they try to pay themselves $5 a day, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which doesn't sound like very much money to us at all. But so our money helps empower women in terms of work, right? Our money
Right.
helps buy supplies so that the women can work and that the girls can get the kits that they need. And then also there's opportunity that's kind of new in what I'm doing for maybe more bags to be made and sent. What else? Anything else that you want to share just about like what you're doing with the kids or the money, or maybe even just a story that you might want to share about just how you see this
Yeah.
particular part of your ministry? Because I know this is a small part, but this particular part of your ministry and how it's bringing hope to the girls and women there.
Yeah, it's small, but it's actually very large, and I have two stories that I want to share with you.
Good.
First.
I love stories.
Yes, well, actually three stories. So the first story is about soap. So the kits include a little bar of soap, and there is in the little community where these women are now employed. We call it a gift. We don't call it like a pay, because
Okay.
we don't comply necessarily with like minimum wage laws and those
Sure.
kinds of things. Although it is minimum wage, but so we call it a gift, and it's a project of the church. So it's
Okay.
run as a project of the Lutheran Church, and so there's a woman who makes soap. So we thought, well, wouldn't that be great if we could buy the soap locally and
Mhm.
support another small business in the community. And so that's actually one of the things that we're extremely attentive to, is trying to empower women to support themselves and their children through this work. And
Yeah.
so whether that's sewing the components for the kits or making the soap, and who knows, and there's a local print shop that we use to print the little booklet that goes into each kit. So we try to locally source as much as we can. And so that's a win-win-win situation, right? So we're getting kits to girls, empowering and employing women. So I have two stories about the kits in action that I'd like to share. So one is from Pastor Emily. Pastor Emily is a trained sex education teacher in the Lutheran Church, and she also is a pastor. And she has a congregation of about 30 families that's in a small town in El Salvador. And they started a satellite congregation, a 2-hour walk up into the mountains from the town. Because up in the mountains where this little satellite is, there's no school, there's no work, there's no church. These people live in a very isolated situation.
The children just don't go to school? I'm sorry to interrupt
Don't go
you.
to school.
They just don't go to
They
school.
don't go. Right. There are 60
Okay.
children who should be in school,
Okay.
but they can't walk 2 hours. It's not
Right.
safe. So the pastor, along with a couple of the women from her town congregation, walk up the mountain a couple times a week to tend to the flock up there. The pastor cannot walk alone, because if you know about El Salvador, you know that there's
Dangerous.
danger.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky, but they do it. And so in her work up in the hills, the Pastor Emily discovered that she had 3 9-year-olds who were pregnant. So I'll say that again, 3 9-year-olds who were pregnant. So in isolated communities, sexual abuse, whether that's from a member of the family or from other sources, is a huge problem in El Salvador. And part of the sex education program that the church has, starting with kindergartners, is your body is your own. No one can touch you.
Right.
Things that we would teach children that are appropriate for children. So the pastor knew that sex education needed to happen in this community. And so she has a sister church as well for her little town church. It's a church in Milwaukee that's struggling to keep its doors open, but they scrounged up $400 to fund the sex education course in the community, and to purchase the kit from the collective in El Salvador. And so there are kits now with all of the menstruating girls and women in this small community, provided in part through the money that you have given, and in part from this $400 that came from a little church in Milwaukee, because the women there, when they were menstruating, would just sit on a piece of cardboard or whatever they had. I mean, they couldn't do anything because they had nothing. And women do use rags if they have rags. And so it was a very grim situation that Pastor Emily was describing. And now I've received photos, and I'll try to send you some of those photos from this community. But there's a whole bunch of new life in the community, and Pastor Emily is teaching children when she can, and trying to fill up some of those gaps. But at least for the girls, and the women, they've had some good education, and they are continuing with that good education about their own bodies. And the girls and the women who need them are getting the kits that they need.
As painful and hard as that story is to listen to, I do appreciate you sharing it. And it just reminds me like how important it is to be people who are interested in taking care of practical needs. I think sometimes in our comfortable Christian circles, we think that we need to be like educating and we need to be bringing the gospel and we need to like, this is what mission work is. And all of that is true and good and right. But sometimes people need food. Sometimes people need to not sit on cardboard because they're having their period. Right. And so, and sometimes in any mission work that might be like, what am I trying to say? Like more complicated than that actually it can't even be planted when people are like, I can't even receive that because I'm cold or I'm, whatever. So it just reminds me of how intentional we need to be about really understanding the people that we're desiring to serve, really understanding what their needs are. So yeah, thanks. Yeah. And you have another story too, I think. Yeah.
I do.
Yes.
And it's from today.
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 It's like breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. So we are currently in a situation of being confined to our homes.
Right.
And here in the United States, depending on what city you're in, that might mean something different for each of us. But in El Salvador, right now, in a way to prevent the virus from taking hold, because COVID-19 has not really entered El Salvador.
I was reading in your blog that you just maybe day before yesterday or so, and you were talking about how it's not there, but because of the dense population, if it comes, it's like, it's just, it could be disastrous. Yeah. So go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly. And so out of the blue today, Sonia, who is the one who manages the work group of women that are making the kits in El Salvador, she called me with a messenger audio call, and she sent me a photo of what they're doing. And so it was this beautiful conversation. And she said, well, we have fabric. They are confined to their homes. The police are out in the streets. They cannot leave their homes or they will be arrested. And so they're confined to their homes, but she's got fabric, which she smartly grabbed out of the church. Mm-hmm. And a number of the sewing women live really close to her. Mm-hmm. And so what they are doing, they took a decision as a group to make cloth masks. Mm-hmm. Because one person per family can go outside to go buy food for the family or go to the pharmacy to get medications. And so that one person is required to wear a mask. Yeah. And so Sonia has a small business using Days for Girls cotton and the liner. She found a pattern online. Yeah. And yesterday they made 13 masks and they sold all 13, and they're supporting their families using the money from making the masks. But I think what she said to me is really important is we took the decision as the family because we need to stay animated. So in Spanish, there's a word animar, which means like encouraged, or it translates to animated, but it means like, keep yourself alive, right? And we don't want to panic. Right. We don't want to fall into despair. So we took this decision to make masks. We had the idea, and we're doing something useful. We're doing something that's needed. We're doing it as a family, and we can make a little bit of money to buy, send with our Carla, the one who can go to the store to go buy the food. And so, it was really this conversation, and I could hear in her voice that making the masks gave her purpose, and that she lives with 22 people in a tiny, tiny space. 22 people in a room. I mean, I'm sitting in a space right now. Yeah. And, it's like this. I can't even imagine. And she said, we're keeping the kids busy,
Mhm.
and we are doing this, and our spirits are good. And
Yeah.
so I thought, wow, if this project didn't exist,
Right.
seriously, had
Yeah.
she not grabbed the serger and the fabric from the church and
Mhm.
walked them down the hill to her house,
Mhm.
I mean, she was thinking ahead,
Yeah.
and it's going to sustain them through this because they feel like they've got a purpose. And I told her I'd read a story on my blog about
Yes.
so she sent me photos today.
That's
More photos.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I
and
think what I really grab onto that too is like is the purpose. Like I don't
right,
have to just panic.
right.
I can be, and that's one of the things that I have said, and maybe I've already said it since we've been talking, but when I was in the kitchen, and reading the article and crying, and my heart was stirred to I don't know what, like I didn't know what, which I think you understand. When it's time, like you feel the stirring, but you don't know what that's going to mean, down the road. But I just had this like I want to be part of the solution. I don't I want to be part of the solution, and I think that's what Sonia is.
Yes,
That's the same, right? I don't if I can wallow, I can be nervous, I can be anxious, or I can put my hands and feet, my voice and my knowledge, and to work and be part of the solution. And I think that's what to me. I'm like helping girls stay in school. I think is a part of helping all of them understand that you have absolutely the ability to be part of the solution, whatever solution goes with the stirring that God lays on your heart too. Yeah, those are both beautiful stories. Yeah. Um, and I've taken up a lot of your time.
well,
Is there anything else that
yeah,
just that comes to mind that you'd like to share? Anything else?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So I just want to share another really great outcome that
yeah,
has come from this wonderful group of women, and who knows, men, folks that are supporting your efforts. And that is what happened after this year's Mission of Healing. So each year this happens during kind of around the time of Valentine's Day, because in El Salvador, February is the month of love and friendship. And
okay,
so the missions of healing happen in that time frame as an expression of love and friendship. And so we did our fair days, and this year we brought 450 kits from the United States made by women, including the bags that were created by your
yeah,
friend. And those, were given away. And afterwards, there was this request from the schools in the town that is nearest to our sister church, where Sonia does the sex education
okay,
talks. And every single girl in the middle school, starting with fifth grade up through high school, has gotten a kit. Every single girl in the town. And so if I add this up, it's a lot of kids, like an extra, besides the 450 that were given out to some of them, because one of the fair days was in that town, but like another 350 kits that were given to girls in that community, so that every single girl. And it came at the request of the principals from the
mm,
schools. And so I was actually a part of one of the education days in the school where we went, and it was like a 1 day teaching extravaganza with like the basic information the girls need about menstruation. The more complete sex education piece will follow. But every girl has her kit. And so during this time of home lockdown, um, you
mm.
know, I'm just so grateful that all of these girls and all of these young women
Mhm.
have their kit.
Have what they need.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the way we've structured the funds that come through you is the majority of those, in fact, just really all of it goes to buying the kits. And so it's the donation that's received in an account, and then there's a set number of kits that are produced each month by the collective, and then those kits are given to the sex educators, and then they're given out through the education system of the sex education system. And then that monthly set amount that purchases that kit, a number of kits, goes to the women where they use it to pay themselves and buy the materials.
Buy the materials for the next round of kits, right? Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I believe this with my whole heart. The best is yet to come. I think that we're just getting started in the work that we can do together and the work that we can do that really supports the girls and women that are a part of your life in El Salvador. And again, I just really, really appreciate you for your obedience to the Lord and the risks that you've taken, the sacrifice that you make to do the work you do. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the Holy Spirit connecting us so that that I can hopefully, just like I said, lend my voice and my heart to this effort. And we're going to raise some money for you on Monday. And for those of you watching now or later, I'm going to post links on how you can contribute. I have an email that's ready to go out later this week to everybody so that you have exactly how you can give money to this. And Linda, if for those who have fallen in love with you over the last 45 minutes or so, how else can we follow you? I know you have a blog, but where can we look up more information about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, you can feel free to share my email address with anybody that would want to ask specific follow-up questions or want more information.
I will do that. Good. Yeah.
Including efforts that are happening in other parts of the world too, because I know not everybody might feel strong connections with El Salvador, but you know, if your own congregation or whatever network you are in has some connections, there are other ways too to support good things for girls globally. For sure, my blog, which is Walking with El Salvador. So that's easy to find. It used to be called Linda's El Salvador blog, and if you Google that, it still goes to the right place.
Okay.
Yep. So that
I'll put the link in the comments when we get off here too, so they can check about that. So
yeah, and so those are probably the best ways, and then I can link people up to other things if they're interested as well via email.
Awesome. Linda, thank you so much for being with me this afternoon and talking about this work. And we'll look forward to the results on Monday. I have a $200. I don't know if I've shared this with you. I have a $200 matching gift that's already kind of waiting. So the first $200 that comes in gets doubled right away. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, I know. So I'm grateful for that gift that's already kind of got us started. So I'm going to sign off here for now. And for those of you watching, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. You have a good rest of your day. Peace.
Peace.